boy who drew death. The cold autumn wind blew through Ravenwood, Massachusetts. It carried with it the smell of dying leaves and the promise of winter. The year was 1852. Most of America was looking forward to better days. But this small town in the Northeast held dark secrets that few people dared to talk about. This story doesn't start with Elijah Kessler himself. It begins with the finding of his leather journal, hidden under the floor of an empty house on Willow Street. Someone found it in the autumn of 1853, exactly 1 year after the terrible things I'm about to tell you happened. The journal had no words in it, only drawings. Drawings so perfect and so horrible that the police officer who found them locked them away right away. He said they were evil and against God. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's go back to September 1852, when young Elijah Kessler was just 12 years old. He was a quiet boy with pale skin and green eyes that seemed to see everything. His father was Abraham Kessler, the town doctor. Elijah wasn't popular with the other kids, but they didn't hate him either. He just stayed by himself, watching the world with those strange, knowing eyes. Ravenwood was like many New England towns back then. Old traditions and scary stories walked side by side down the stone streets. The people went to church every Sunday without fail. But they also hung dried plants above their doors to keep evil spirits away. They talked about progress and learning, but they whispered about strange lights sometimes seen in the northern forest. It was a place caught between two worlds, the old and the new, the real and the mysterious. Dr. Abraham Kessler stood for the scientific hopes of the time. He had gone to Harvard Medical School and came back to his hometown wanting to bring modern medicine to Ravenwood. His wife Elizabeth had died when Elijah was born. This tragedy had made the doctor into a hard man who showed little feeling and spoke few warm words. The Kessler house stood at the edge of town. It was a 3-story building made of dark stone with narrow windows. Dr. Kessler's medical office was on the first floor. He and Elijah lived in the rooms above. The basement held the doctor's laboratory, a place Elijah was never allowed to enter. But the boy often crept down the narrow stairs late at night. He would watch through the crack in the door as his father cut up dead bodies that came from Boston for his research. It was on one such night, September 17, 1852, that Elijah's life changed forever. As he looked through the basement door, watching his father work on the body of an old man, Elijah heard it for the first time. A whisper as thin as spider web and as cold as winter frost, sliding through the air like a snake. "Another comes soon," it said. The voice was neither man nor woman, young nor old. "Another joins the endless sleep." Elijah pressed his hands against his ears, but the voice kept talking. When he looked back through the crack in the door, he saw not his father bending over the dead body, but a figure covered in shadows. Its shape kept shifting and changing as if it couldn't decide what form to take. The figure turned, showing not a face, but emptiness, a nothingness that somehow still seemed amused. "You hear me, child?" it said, though Elijah would later swear the thing had no mouth to speak with. "How interesting! How very interesting indeed!" Then the vision was gone. Elijah saw only his father, carefully writing notes in his journal, unaware that his son was watching or that a supernatural visitor had appeared in his laboratory. Elijah ran back to his room and hid under his blankets, despite the warm September night. He told himself it had been a nightmare, a waking dream caused by too much imagination and too many scary stories he secretly bought from the bookseller on Market Street. But in the morning, as Elijah sat at breakfast across from his stern father, the whisper came back. "She falls today," it said, the words like icicles forming in his mind. "The widow on Merchant Street. The stairs will be her end." Dr. Kessler noticed his son's sudden paleness. "Are you sick, Elijah?" he asked. His voice carried the cold distance he used with patience rather than fatherly concern. "No, sir," Elijah replied, pushing away his half-eaten porridge. "May I be excused? I don't want to be late for school." The doctor nodded curtly and went back to reading the medical journal beside his plate. Elijah grabbed his books and slate and hurried out into the crisp morning air. He hoped the voice would fade as he got farther from the house. It did not. All through his lessons, The whisper repeated its dark prediction, growing more insistent with each passing hour. By noon, Elijah could stand it no longer. During lunch break, he slipped away from the schoolyard and ran toward Merchant Street. He was driven by a need he couldn't understand or resist. Merchant Street housed the finer shops of Ravenwood, as well as several nice homes above the stores. Elijah didn't know which of these homes belonged to the widow, but as he stood uncertainly in the middle of the cobblestone street, the whisper guided him. "There," it said, directing his gaze to a 3-story building with a hat shop on the ground floor. "Watch and see the truth of my words." Elijah hesitated, then ducked into the narrow alley beside the building. He wasn't sure what he was waiting for or why he had obeyed the evil voice, but something, curiosity perhaps, or a growing realization that he was caught in events beyond his control, kept him there. 20 minutes passed before the hat shop door opened and an elderly woman came out. She wore black from head to toe. Her silver hair was pulled back in a tight bun under a modest bonnet. In her arms, she carried a hat box, and her face had the distracted look of someone lost in thought. "Mrs. Abernathy," the whisper told Elijah, though he had never met the woman before. "Watch now." Mrs. Abernathy walked to the side entrance of the building, which led to the upper floors by way of a steep outside staircase. This was common in such buildings, letting residents come and go without passing through the shops below. As she began to climb, Elijah was seized by sudden certainty. "Stop!" he shouted, running from his hiding place. "Don't go up there." The elderly woman turned, startled by the boy's shout. "Young man, what on earth?" Her words were cut short as the heel of her boot caught on the hem of her dress. She wobbled dangerously, the hat box tumbling from her grasp. Elijah lunged forward, his hand outstretched, but he was too far away. Too late. Mrs. Abernathy fell backward down the stairs. Her body made a series of sickening thuds against the wooden steps before coming to rest on the cobblestones below. Elijah heard the distinct crack of bone, saw the unnatural angle of her neck, and knew before he reached her side that she was dead. People came running at the noise, the hat maker, a police officer who happened to be passing by, and several customers from neighboring shops. Elijah stood frozen, staring at the lifeless body of Mrs. Abernathy, his mind echoing with the satisfied chuckle of the whisper. "You see," it said, "I speak only truth." The police officer questioned Elijah, his suspicion clear. Why had the boy been watching Mrs. Abernathy? Why had he shouted, startling her just before she fell? Elijah's stuttered explanations made little sense, even to his own ears. How could he tell them about the voice, the prediction? They would think him mad or worse, somehow responsible for the widow's death. It was the hat maker, Miss Harper, who finally defended him. "The boy was trying to warn her," she said firmly. "I heard him myself. He shouted for her to stop before she fell. He was trying to prevent this tragedy, not cause it." The police officer remained doubtful but released Elijah with a warning to go straight back to school. Instead, Elijah ran home, his chest tight with the knowledge that he had witnessed death's work, foretold by something he could neither see nor understand. That night, as Elijah lay in bed listening to the grandfather clock in the hallway tick away the seconds of his now changed life, he felt a need unlike anything he had experienced before. Rising from his bed, he moved to his small writing desk and took out a sheet of drawing paper and a pencil. His hand moved on its own, guided by an invisible force. The whisper returned, stronger now, almost pleased. "Draw what you saw," it urged. "Draw what you know." And Elijah did. His pencil scratched across the paper, capturing with amazing accuracy the broken form of Mrs. Abernathy at the foot of the stairs. Every detail was rendered with a precision that should have been beyond the abilities of a 12-year-old boy. The odd angle of her neck, the spilled contents of the hat box, even the pattern of blood seeping from her ear onto the cobblestones. When he finished, Elijah stared at the drawing in horror. How had he created such a thing? He had some talent for art, yes, but this was something else entirely, a perfect memory rendered in pencil, more like a photograph than a sketch. He moved to tear the paper to shreds, but his hands refused to obey. Instead, he found himself carefully placing the drawing in his bottom desk drawer, beneath his other sketches of birds and trees and the Ravenwood church steeple. "There will be more," the whisper promised. Many more. The following day brought blessed silence. The whisper remained absent as Elijah attended school, his mind constantly returning to the drawing hidden in his desk. Had it all been some strange delusion? Perhaps the stress of witnessing Mrs. Abernathy's death had affected his mind more than he realized. His relief was short-lived. 3 days later, as Elijah helped his father prepare dinner, their housekeeper, Mrs. Sullivan, came only 3 times a week. The whisper returned with renewed strength. "The blacksmith burns tonight," it announced, sending Elijah's knife clattering to the floor. "Flesh melts from bone in cleansing fire." Dr. Kessler looked up sharply at the noise. "Elijah, what is it?" The boy shook his head, picking up the knife with trembling fingers. "Nothing, father. The knife slipped, that's all." But it wasn't nothing. All through dinner, the whisper repeated its grim prediction, describing in horrible detail how Thomas Fletcher, the town blacksmith, would meet his end that very night. Elijah pushed his food around his plate, his appetite gone, his mind racing. Should he try to warn Fletcher? After what happened with Mrs. Abernathy, would anyone believe him? Once his father retired to his study, Elijah slipped out of the house. The September evening was cool, the streets of Ravenwood lit by gas lamps that cast long shadows across the cobblestones. The blacksmith's forge lay at the south end of town, a large building of stone and timber with a chimney that belched smoke from dawn till dusk. As Elijah approached, he saw that the forge was still active despite the late hour. Thomas Fletcher was known for his dedication to his craft, often working well into the night to complete important jobs. The glow from within pulsed like a living heart, and Elijah could hear the rhythmic clang of hammer on anvil. He hesitated at the door, suddenly uncertain. What would he say? "Excuse me, Mr. Fletcher, but a voice that only I can hear says you're going to burn to death tonight?" The blacksmith would laugh him out of the forge, or worse, drag him back to his father with complaints about the doctor's disturbed son. While Elijah stood frozen in indecision, the whisper grew more insistent. "Now," it urged. "It happens now. Watch, child. Learn." Against his better judgment, Elijah peered through the window of the forge. Inside, Thomas Fletcher worked bare-chested at his anvil, his powerful arms glistening with sweat as he shaped a piece of glowing metal. The forge fire blazed hot and bright, casting the cavernous room in shades of orange and red. What happened next occurred with such speed that Elijah would later struggle to recall the exact sequence of events. Fletcher turned to place the metal back in the fire. His foot caught on something, a stray tool perhaps, and he stumbled forward. His arms windmilled as he fought to regain his balance, but momentum carried him directly into the forge. Fletcher's scream was unlike anything Elijah had ever heard, a sound of pure agony that would haunt his dreams for years to come. The blacksmith's hair and beard caught fire instantly, followed by his woolen trousers. He staggered back, a human torch, his flesh blackening and peeling as the flames consumed him. Elijah wanted to run, to fetch water, to do something, anything to help, but his body refused to move, locked in place by horror and the strange compulsion of the whisper. "Watch," it commanded. "Remember." Fletcher collapsed to the ground, still screaming, still burning. The flames spread to a nearby workbench covered in oil-soaked rags, and within minutes, the entire forge was ablaze. Only then did Elijah break free from his paralysis. He ran through the streets of Ravenwood, shouting fire, fire at the blacksmiths. At the top of his lungs, men emerged from homes and businesses, forming a bucket brigade from the town well to the forge. But it was too late for Thomas Fletcher. By the time the fire was brought under control, nothing remained of the blacksmith but charred bones among the ashes. That night Elijah drew again. His hand moved with the same unnatural precision, capturing the moment of Fletcher's death in gruesome detail. The man's face twisted in agony, flesh melting from bone, the greedy flames reaching up to claim him. When the drawing was complete, Elijah placed it with the first, his hands shaking but obedient to a will not entirely his own. 2 deaths, 2 drawings, and the whisper growing stronger, more demanding with each passing day. Word of the strange boy who had been present at both recent fatalities spread through Ravenwood like wildfire. People began to look at Elijah differently, crossing themselves when he passed or crossing to the other side of the street to avoid him altogether. Children at school called him Death's Shadow and refused to sit near him during lessons. Dr. Kessler, always more scientist than father, observed his son's increasing isolation with clinical detachment. People fear what they do not understand, he told Elijah over breakfast one morning, a week after the blacksmith's death. Their superstition is a failing of education, nothing more. Yes, father, Elijah replied, not daring to share the truth that perhaps in this case the townspeople's fears were justified. The whisper came again that very afternoon as Elijah sat alone during the school lunch break, carefully positioned beneath a tree at the far edge of the yard, away from the wary eyes of his classmates. The twins drown tomorrow, it announced, sending a chill down Elijah's spine despite the warm September sun. Beneath the mill pond's placid surface, they struggle and surrender. Elijah knew immediately which twins the voice meant: Peter and Paul Whitney, 8-year-old boys with identical faces and matching mischievous grins. They lived with their parents on a farm just outside town. Though they were 4 years younger than Elijah, he had always liked them, admiring their carefree spirit and the easy affection they showed one another. This time, Elijah resolved to prevent the tragedy. He would warn the Whitney family, make them keep the twins away from water, stand guard at the mill pond himself if necessary. The voice might speak the truth, but perhaps the future it predicted could be changed. After school, Elijah ran the 2 miles to the Whitney farm, arriving breathless and disheveled. Mrs. Whitney answered his frantic knocking, her kind face creased with concern at the sight of the doctor's son in such a state. "Why, Elijah Kessler, whatever is the matter?" she asked, wiping flour-covered hands on her apron. "The twins," Elijah gasped. "Are they here? You must keep them away from the mill pond. Promise me you won't let them near any water tomorrow." Mrs. Whitney's expression shifted from concern to confusion. "The boys are helping their father with the livestock," she said slowly. "But what's this about the mill pond? The children know they're not to go there alone." "Please," Elijah begged, "just promise me you'll watch them carefully tomorrow. Don't let them out of your sight." Before Mrs. Whitney could respond, the twins themselves came racing around the corner of the house, their faces flushed with exertion and identical grins splitting their freckled faces. "Is that Elijah Kessler?" One of them, Peter, Elijah thought, called out. "Did you bring any of those peppermint sticks from Abrams's store?" Elijah couldn't bear to look at the boys, knowing what fate had in store for them. Instead, he addressed Mrs. Whitney again, his voice urgent. "Promise me, please." The woman's face softened. "I promise, Elijah. I'll keep a close eye on them tomorrow. Now, would you like to stay for dinner? You look half-starved, and we've plenty to spare." But Elijah was already backing away, shaking his head. "I have to get home. Just remember your promise." He ran most of the way back to town, hoping he had done enough, praying that the whisper could be defied, its predictions thwarted by human intervention. The next day was a Saturday, and Elijah woke with a sense of dread that only intensified as the whisper began its now familiar litany. "Today," it said, "the twins, the mill pond, noon." Elijah dressed quickly and slipped out of the house before his father could assign him the usual weekend chores. He made his way to the mill pond at the edge of town, a deep man-made lake that powered the flour mill. The morning was unusually warm for late September, the kind of Indian summer day that brought people outdoors to enjoy what might be the last pleasant weather before autumn took firm hold. Elijah positioned himself on a large rock overlooking the pond, determined to keep watch. If the Whitney twins appeared, despite their mother's promise, he would be ready to intervene. The hours crawled by. 9 o'clock, 10, 11. As noon approached, Elijah began to hope that perhaps he had succeeded, perhaps Mrs. Whitney had kept her word, keeping her sons far from the mill pond and its dangers. Then he heard them, the high-pitched, excited voices of young boys approaching along the path that led from town to the mill pond. Elijah stood, his heart sinking as Peter and Paul Whitney came into view, carrying fishing poles and a small pail. "You shouldn't be here," Elijah called out as they neared. "Where are your parents? Your mother promised to keep you home today." The twins exchanged glances, their identical faces showing matching expressions of surprise. "Ma thinks we're helping Pa repair the chicken coop," one of them, Paul, Elijah was almost certain, replied. "But it's too nice a day to waste on chores. The fish are biting something fierce after yesterday's rain." "You have to leave," Elijah insisted, climbing down from his rock to block their path. "It's not safe here today." The twins laughed, the carefree sound of children who had never known true danger. "Not safe," Peter scoffed. "We swim here all summer. We know this pond better than anyone." "Please," Elijah begged, "just go home. Fish another day." But the Whitney boys had heard the rumors about Elijah, the strange tales that had begun circulating after Mrs. Abernathy's fall and the blacksmith's fiery end. They exchanged another glance, this one tinged with wariness. "Ma says we're not supposed to talk to you anymore," Paul said bluntly. "Says you bring bad luck." "It's not luck," Elijah said desperately. "Please, just listen to me. Go home." But the twins darted around him, running to the small wooden dock that extended out over the deeper part of the mill pond. They dropped their fishing gear and began removing their shoes, clearly intending to cool their feet in the water. Elijah ran after them, but as he set foot on the dock, the whisper rose to a roar in his mind. "Now," it commanded, and as if in response, the rotted boards beneath the twins gave way with a splintering crack. One moment the boys were there, laughing and jostling each other as they rolled up their trousers. The next, they had vanished through the broken dock into the dark waters below. Elijah raced to the edge, peering down into the murky depths. He could see them thrashing for small hands reaching up toward the light, their movements already growing weaker as their woolen clothes dragged them down. Without hesitation, Elijah dove in. The cold water shocked his system, and for a moment he too felt the pull of the depths, the weight of his own clothing threatening to drag him down alongside the twins. But Elijah was a strong swimmer. His father had insisted on it, viewing the skill as a practical necessity rather than a leisure activity. He managed to grab one of the boys, Peter, he thought, and push him upward toward the surface. The child gasped and coughed as his head cleared the water, but there was no time for relief. Elijah dove again, searching desperately for the second twin. The whisper laughed in his mind, a sound like dry leaves scraping against tombstones. "Too late," it taunted. "Always too late." Elijah's lungs burned as he peered through the murky water. There a flash of pale skin against the dark silt of the pond bottom. He swam deeper, his ears popping with the pressure, and grasped Paul's wrist. The boy was limp, unresisting as Elijah pulled him toward the surface, breaking through into the air. Elijah dragged both boys to the shore. Peter was conscious, coughing up pond water and crying weakly for his brother. But Paul lay still, his lips blue, his chest motionless. Elijah had watched his father perform resuscitation enough times to know the technique. He turned Paul onto his stomach, pressing firmly between the boy's shoulder blades to expel water from his lungs, then rolled him onto his back to perform chest compressions. "Breathe," Elijah commanded, pressing down rhythmically on the small chest. "Breathe, Paul. Please breathe." But the whisper knew better. "He joins the endless sleep," it said, its tone almost gentle now, "as I foretold." Elijah continued his efforts until his arms ached and spots danced before his eyes. He was still trying to revive Paul when the adults arrived, Mr. Whitney, who had discovered the twins' deception and come looking for them. The miller, drawn by Peter's increasingly hysterical cries, and by cruel coincidence, Dr. Kessler, who had been called to attend to the miller's wife's difficult pregnancy. Dr. Kessler pulled his son away from Paul's body, taking over the resuscitation attempt with the efficient movements of a trained physician. But after several minutes, he sat back on his heels, shaking his head. "I'm sorry," he said to Mr. Whitney, who had gathered his surviving son in his arms. "The boy is gone." What followed was worse than anything Elijah could have imagined. Peter, in his shock and grief, pointed a trembling finger at Elijah and cried, "He knew! He told us not to come here today. He knew Paul was going to die." All eyes turned to Elijah, dripping wet and shivering on the shore of the mill pond. How could he explain? What possible reason could he give for his foreknowledge that wouldn't sound like the ravings of a madman or the confession of a murderer? I had a bad feeling," he stammered. "A premonition." Mr. Whitney's grief transformed into rage. "A premonition?" he spat. "Or a plan? First the widow, then Fletcher, now my boy. Everywhere you go, death follows. What are you, boy? What kind of devil's spawn are you?" Dr. Kessler stepped between his son and the grieving father. "Control yourself, Whitney," he said coldly. "The boy pulled your sons from the water. He tried to save them both. After luring them here," Whitney countered, his face contorted with anguish. "After somehow knowing what would happen. That's not natural. It's not right." The whisper chuckled in Elijah's mind. "They begin to see," it said. "They begin to understand what you are becoming." That night, Elijah drew again, his hand moving across the paper with the same unnatural precision. He captured the moment perfectly. Paul Whitney suspended in the dark water, arms outstretched, bubbles escaping from his open mouth, his eyes wide with the realization that he was dying. When the drawing was complete, Elijah added it to the growing collection in his desk drawer. 3 pieces of damnation, evidence hidden beneath innocent sketches of Ravenwood's landscape. The following weeks brought a subtle but unmistakable change to Elijah's life. People no longer simply avoided him, they feared him. Mothers pulled their children close when he passed. Shopkeepers refused to serve him. Even the minister looked at him with barely concealed suspicion during Sunday services. Dr. Kesler, ever the rationalist, dismissed the town's reaction as superstitious nonsense. "Let them talk," he told Elijah over dinner 2 weeks after Paul Whitney's drowning. "In time, some new gossip will capture their attention, and this will be forgotten." But Elijah knew better. The whisper came more frequently now, announcing deaths almost daily. Some were distant: a farmer 3 counties over gored by his bull, a sailor lost at sea off the coast of Maine. Others struck closer to home. Each time Elijah tried to intervene, to prevent the tragedy, but his efforts always seemed to hasten rather than hinder death's design. And after each death he drew, the compulsion was irresistible, as much a part of him now as breathing. His desk drawer could no longer contain the growing collection, so Elijah began hiding the drawings beneath a loose floorboard in his bedroom, dozens of sheets, each depicting the moment of death with perfect, terrible accuracy. October arrived, bringing with it colder temperatures and the vibrant colors of New England autumn. Elijah had grown thin and pale, the constant strain of his grim foreknowledge taking its toll. He no longer attended school after several parents had withdrawn their children, rather than let them share a classroom with that Kessler boy. Dr. Kessler had reluctantly agreed to homeschool his son until the hysteria died down. But isolation brought no peace. The whisper was Elijah's constant companion, filling his days and nights with its cold observations and grim predictions. Sometimes it told him details about the deceased, secrets they had kept in life, regrets they carried to their graves, the small kindnesses and cruelties that had shaped their existence. "I have walked beside humanity since the first of your kind drew breath," it told him one night as Elijah lay sleepless in his bed. "I have witnessed the fall of empires and the birth of nations. I have stood invisible at the deathbeds of kings and paupers alike. And now, child, I walk with you." "Why me?" Elijah dared to ask, speaking aloud to the empty room. "What do you want from me?" The whisper seemed amused by the question. "Why does the rain fall? Why does the sun rise? It simply is as you simply are. You have the sight, child. You always have. I merely opened your eyes." "I don't want to see," Elijah whispered, tears tracking silently down his cheeks. "I don't want to know when people are going to die. I don't want to draw these horrible pictures." "What you want is immaterial," the voice replied coldly. "You are what you are, a witness, a recorder, my scribe in the land of the living. Late October brought the first true cold snap of the season, ice forming on the edges of puddles and breath fogging in the chill morning air. On the 27th day of the month, as Elijah sat at breakfast across from his increasingly distant father, the whisper came again. But this time, its message struck Elijah like a physical blow. "The doctor falls tonight," it said, sounding almost gleeful. "The father joins the endless sleep, his own medicine his undoing." Elijah's spoon clattered to the table. "No," he gasped, staring at his father with horror. "Not him." Dr. Kessler looked up from his newspaper, his brow furrowed. "Elijah, what is it?" The boy shook his head, unable to form words. How could he tell his father that death had marked him? That the entity whispering in Elijah's mind had announced his impending demise with the same casual cruelty it used for all its predictions? "I'm not feeling well," Elijah managed at last. "May I be excused?" The doctor's frown deepened. "You do look pale. Perhaps you should lie down. I'll check on you before I leave for my rounds." Elijah nodded and fled to his room, his mind racing. He had to find a way to prevent his father's death. Unlike the others, this was someone he truly cared for. Despite Dr. Kessler's emotional distance, he was still Elijah's father, his only family in the world. All day, Elijah watched his father like a hawk, finding excuses to remain close to him as he saw patients in his ground-floor surgery. When Dr. Kessler prepared to leave for his afternoon house calls, Elijah begged to accompany him. "Please, father," he implored. "I've been cooped up in the house for weeks. The fresh air would do me good." Dr. Kessler hesitated, then nodded. "Very well, but you will remain in the carriage while I attend to my patients. I'll not have you exposed to whatever contagions they may harbor." Elijah agreed readily, relieved to have been granted permission to stay near his father. The afternoon passed slowly as they traveled from house to house, Dr. Kessler tending to Ravenwood's ill while Elijah waited anxiously in the carriage, watching for any sign of danger. As twilight approached, the whisper grew more insistent. "Tonight," it repeated. "His medicine, his undoing." Elijah racked his brain, trying to decipher the cryptic warning. His father's medicine could mean many things. A treatment gone wrong, perhaps, or an accident in his laboratory. How was Elijah to prevent a tragedy when he didn't know its exact nature? They returned home as darkness fell, the gas lamps of Ravenwood casting long shadows across the cobblestone streets. Dr. Kessler disappeared into his study immediately, muttering about patient notes that needed updating. Elijah paced the hallway outside, listening intently for any sound that might indicate distress. When the grandfather clock in the hall struck 8, Dr. Kessler emerged from his study, looking weary. "I'll be in my laboratory for the next few hours," he informed Elijah. "Have Mrs. Sullivan prepare a cold supper. I'll eat when my work is complete." "What are you working on?" Elijah asked, trying to keep the desperation from his voice. "Perhaps I could assist you." His father gave him an odd look. "You've never shown interest in my research before. But no, this is delicate work. I'm testing a new compound, a potential treatment for consumption that shows great promise." Consumption, the disease that had claimed countless lives across New England, that left its victims wasted and weak, coughing their lives away drop by bloody drop. If his father had indeed discovered a treatment, it would be a medical breakthrough of enormous significance. "Be careful," Elijah said, unable to keep the pleading note from his voice. "Whatever you're doing, please be careful." Dr. Kessler's expression softened slightly, the closest thing to affection he had shown his son in years. "I am always careful, Elijah. It is the cornerstone of good science." He patted the boy's shoulder awkwardly. "Go and read for a while. I'll see you in the morning." But Elijah knew there would be no morning, not unless he found a way to intervene. As soon as his father disappeared down the cellar stairs, Elijah crept after him, positioning himself in his usual observation spot, the narrow gap between the door and frame that allowed him to see into the laboratory without being detected. Dr. Kessler moved about the cellar with practiced efficiency, arranging glass vials and beakers, consulting his notes, measuring powders with a small brass scale. Elijah watched, holding his breath, as his father mixed chemicals in precise amounts, occasionally heating mixtures over a Bunsen burner or filtering solutions through paper. The whisper grew more excited with each passing minute. Soon, it said. Very soon now. Hours passed. The grandfather clock upstairs struck 10, then 11. Elijah's legs cramped from maintaining his uncomfortable position, but he dared not move, dared not take his eyes off his father for even a moment. Just after 11:30, Dr. Kessler held up a small vial containing a clear liquid, examining it in the light of his lamp with an expression of satisfaction. At last, he murmured to himself. If my calculations are correct, this should neutralize the bacillus without harming the surrounding tissue. He made a notation in his journal, then did something that made Elijah's blood run cold. He drew a small amount of the liquid into a glass dropper, held it up to the light for one final inspection, and then placed the dropper above his own wrist, where he had rolled up his sleeve to reveal a small self-inflicted cut. Father, no! Elijah burst through the door, startling Dr. Kessler so badly that he dropped both the dropper and the vial. The glass shattered on the stone floor, the precious liquid splashing across Dr. Kessler's shoes. Elijah! His father exclaimed, anger replacing surprise. What are you doing down here? I expressly forbade. You were going to test it on yourself, Elijah accused. That compound, you don't know what it might do. That is precisely why I was testing it, Dr. Kessler replied coldly. And I would have used the smallest possible dose, barely enough to observe any reaction. It is how science progresses, Elijah, through careful experimentation. But it would have killed you, Elijah insisted. I know it would have. His father's expression hardened. And how could you possibly know that? Have you suddenly developed expertise in biochemistry that exceeds my own? Elijah hesitated. How could he explain without sounding mad? But the alternative, watching his father die because he was too afraid to speak the truth, was unthinkable. I hear a voice, he said quietly. It tells me when people are going to die. It told me about Mrs. Abernathy and Mr. Fletcher and Paul Whitney. And tonight it told me about you. Dr. Kessler stared at his son, his face unreadable. Then slowly he moved to his desk and sat down heavily in his chair. How long has this been happening? He asked, his voice carefully neutral. Since September, Elijah replied. Since the night I watched you dissect that man from Boston. His father's eyes narrowed. You've been spying on my work. That's not the point, Elijah cried. Did you hear what I said? I can hear death, Father. It speaks to me. It shows me things. Dr. Kessler sighed, removing his spectacles and pinching the bridge of his nose. Elijah, there is no such thing as supernatural premonition. What you're experiencing is a combination of an overactive imagination and the unfortunate coincidence of having witnessed several tragic accidents. They weren't coincidences, Elijah insisted. I knew they were going to happen. I tried to stop them. And yet they happened anyway, his father pointed out, which suggests that your warnings were either after the fact or so vague as to be useless. Elijah felt a surge of frustration. Why wouldn't his father believe him? The evidence was right there. The voice had been correct every single time. I can prove it, he said suddenly. I have drawings. Drawings of each death exactly as it happened. Dr. Kessler's expression shifted from skepticism to concern. Drawings? You've been drawing these accidents. Not accidents, Elijah corrected. Deaths. And not just drawing them, recording them perfectly. Every detail exactly as it happened. Without waiting for a response, Elijah ran up the stairs to his bedroom. He pulled up the loose floorboard and gathered the stack of drawings, dozens of them now, each more detailed and disturbing than the last. He returned to the laboratory and thrust them into his father's hands. See, he said desperately. See what I've been trying to tell you? Dr. Kessler leafed through the drawings slowly, his face growing paler with each image he examined. The precision was undeniable, the level of detail far beyond what a 12-year-old boy should have been capable of producing. And the content, the moments of death captured with such unflinching accuracy, was disturbing in the extreme. "You drew these?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Elijah nodded. "After each death. I can't help it. My hand moves on its own." Dr. Kessler set the drawings aside and looked at his son with new eyes, not the gaze of a father, but the clinical assessment of a physician confronted with an unexpected symptom. "Elijah," he said carefully, "I believe you are ill, not physically but mentally. These drawings, these voices you claim to hear, they are manifestations of a serious condition." "I'm not crazy," Elijah protested. "The voice is real. It's death itself, Father. It chose me as its witness." Dr. Kessler shook his head. "This is a delusion, Elijah. A fantasy your mind has created to cope with the trauma of witnessing Mrs. Abernathy's accident. And once established, the delusion has grown, incorporating new events, creating patterns where none exist." "But I knew you were going to die tonight," Elijah argued. "The voice told me your medicine would be your undoing." His father gestured to the shattered vial on the floor. "And now we'll never know if that's true, will we? Because you interrupted my experiment based on nothing more than your own fevered imagination." The whisper, which had been silent since Elijah's intervention, suddenly returned with a vengeance. "Foolish child," it hissed, "you cannot change what is written. You have only delayed the inevitable." Elijah clapped his hands over his ears, as if that could somehow block out a voice that came from within his own mind. "It's speaking to me now," he told his father. "It says I've only delayed your death, not prevented it." Dr. Kessler rose from his chair, his decision made. "Enough of this nonsense. You need help, Elijah. Professional help beyond what I can provide." "What do you mean?" Elijah asked, a cold dread settling in his stomach. "There is an institution in Boston," his father replied, not meeting his eyes. "The Massachusetts State Hospital for the Mentally Ill. They have made great strides in the treatment of cases like yours, delusions, hallucinations. They have methods to bring the mind back to rationality." Elijah backed away, shaking his head. "You're sending me to an asylum? Because I tried to save your life. Because you are a danger to yourself and potentially to others," Dr. Kessler corrected. "These drawings, Elijah, they show a disturbed mind, and your presence at so many deaths cannot be mere coincidence. Perhaps your delusion has driven you to influence events. Perhaps you are somehow causing these tragedies in order to validate your fantasy." "That's not true," Elijah cried. "I tried to stop them. I wanted to save them." "Nevertheless," his father continued as if Elijah hadn't spoken, "I will make arrangements tomorrow. The hospital has an excellent reputation. They will help you, Elijah. They will make you well again." The whisper laughed, a sound like bones rattling in a box. "He fears you," it said, "as he should, as they all should." Elijah fled from the laboratory, tears blinding him as he stumbled up the stairs and through the darkened house to his bedroom. He slammed the door behind him, leaning against it as sobs racked his thin frame. His own father thought him mad or worse, somehow responsible for the deaths he had tried so desperately to prevent. The whisper followed him, its tone almost sympathetic now. "Poor child," it cooed, "so misunderstood, so alone. Except for me. You will always have me." "Leave me alone," Elijah whimpered, sliding down the door to sit on the floor, his knees drawn up to his chest. "I don't want this. I never wanted any of this. What we want rarely aligns with what we are given," the whisper replied philosophically. "But take heart, child. Your father will not send you away. His own appointment with me comes first." Elijah's head snapped up. "What do you mean?" "I saved him. I stopped him from using that compound. There are many paths to the endless sleep," the whisper said, its tone almost gleeful. "If one is blocked, another opens. The doctor still falls tonight. Even now it begins." A crash from downstairs jolted Elijah from his despair. He scrambled to his feet and threw open his bedroom door, listening intently. Another sound, a groan, followed by the clatter of something metal hitting the floor. Elijah raced down the stairs and back to the laboratory. The door stood ajar, spilling yellow lamplight into the darkened hallway. Inside, he found his father on his knees, one hand clutching his throat, the other braced against the floor as he fought to remain upright. "Father!" Elijah cried, rushing to his side. "What happened?" Dr. Kessler looked up at his son, his eyes wide with shock and dawning comprehension. His lips moved, but no sound emerged. Instead, a trickle of blood ran from the corner of his mouth, bright red against his rapidly paling skin. Elijah's gaze moved to the floor around his father. The shattered vial, the spilled compound, the leather shoes now stained with the clear liquid. "The fumes," Elijah realized aloud. "You breathed in the fumes when it broke." His father managed a small nod, then convulsed, more blood spilling from his mouth. Whatever the compound was, it was destroying him from the inside out. "Help!" Elijah screamed, though he knew it was futile. Their nearest neighbor was a quarter-mile away. The housekeeper wouldn't return until morning. There was no one to hear, no one to help. "Please, someone help us." The whisper sighed contentedly in his mind. "It is as it should be," it said. "As it must be." Dr. Kesler collapsed fully now, his body racked with violent spasms. Elijah knelt beside him, tears streaming down his face, helpless to do anything but watch as his father fought his final battle. A battle Elijah knew with dreadful certainty that he would lose. "I'm sorry," Elijah sobbed. "I tried to save you. I tried." His father's eyes found his, and in them Elijah saw not anger or fear, but a terrible understanding. Then the light in them faded, the spasms ceased, and Dr. Abraham Kessler lay still on the cold stone floor of his laboratory. "The endless sleep claims him," the whisper confirmed unnecessarily. "As I foretold." Elijah remained beside his father's body until dawn broke, sending weak gray light filtering through the narrow cellar windows. He did not weep, he had no tears left. Instead, he sat in numb silence, the whisper his only companion in the long dark hours of the night. When the first rays of sun touched his father's still face, Elijah rose stiffly and made his way to his bedroom. There he took out his paper and pencil and began to draw. His hand moved with the same unnatural precision, capturing his father as he had been in his final moments, on his knees, blood trickling from his mouth, his eyes wide with the knowledge of his own impending death. When the drawing was complete, Elijah added it to the others beneath the floorboard. Then he washed, changed his clothes, and waited for Mrs. Sullivan to arrive and discover what had happened. The official story, as recorded by the town constable, was that Dr. Abraham Kessler had died in a tragic laboratory accident while working on a potential cure for consumption. The compound he was developing had proven more volatile than anticipated, and he had succumbed to its toxic fumes. A great loss to medical science and to the community of Ravenwood, though many privately admitted relief that they would no longer need to face the clinical detachment with which the doctor had treated their ailments. As for Elijah, with no other family to claim him, he was placed in the care of his father's cousin, a stern clergyman named Reverend Thomas Kessler, who lived in Boston. The Reverend, having heard disturbing rumors about his young relation, immediately arranged for Elijah's admission to the Massachusetts State Hospital for the Mentally Ill, the very institution Dr. Kessler had intended for his son. Elijah did not resist. What was the point? The whisper would follow him wherever he went. And at least in the asylum, perhaps fewer people would die because of his dreadful gift. The hospital was a massive structure of red brick and narrow windows, more fortress than place of healing. Elijah was assigned a small room on the third floor, sparsely furnished with a narrow bed, a chair, and a small table. The window was barred, the door locked from the outside. His clothing was replaced with a standard hospital garment of rough cotton, and his few personal possessions, including his drawing materials, were taken away. But they could not take away the whisper, nor the visions that accompanied it. And they could not stop his hand from moving, tracing images in the air or scratching them into the plaster walls with his fingernails when no paper was provided. The doctors called his condition acute melancholia with delusional features. They prescribed cold water treatments, isolation, and various noxious medicines that made Elijah's head spin and his stomach rebel, but did nothing to silence the whisper. Deaths continued to occur around him. A nurse who had been kind to him fell down the stairs, her neck breaking with an audible snap. An orderly who had slipped Elijah an extra piece of bread choked on his own dinner that very night. A fellow patient who had befriended Elijah hanged himself with his bed sheets after hearing the Whisper's predictions through Elijah's desperate warnings. The hospital staff began to notice the pattern. Elijah was moved to a separate wing, isolated from other patients. His contact with the staff was minimized, limited to the brief interactions necessary for his basic care. They feared him, though they couched their fear in medical terminology and rational explanations. But one person did not fear Elijah. Dr. Eleanor Pierce, a young physician with unconventional ideas about mental illness, took an interest in his case. Where others saw a dangerous lunatic, she saw a deeply traumatized child whose delusions might hold symbolic meaning rather than literal truth. "Tell me about the Whisper," she urged during their first session together, 6 months after Elijah's admission to the hospital. "What does it sound like? Is it a man's voice? A woman's?" "Neither," Elijah replied, his own voice hoarse from disuse. "Both. It changes. Sometimes it sounds ancient, sometimes like a child, but always cold, always knowing." Dr. Pierce made notes in her journal, her face betraying no judgment or disbelief. "And it tells you when people are going to die." Elijah nodded. "It describes how it will happen. Sometimes in detail, sometimes just hints. But it's always right. And then you draw what you've seen," she continued, "or what you believe you will see." "What I know I will see," Elijah corrected. "The drawings come after. They're a record, a testimony." Dr. Pierce studied him for a long moment. "Elijah, did you ever consider that perhaps the Whisper is a manifestation of your own fears? That perhaps, having witnessed your mother's death at your birth, you developed an unusual sensitivity to mortality?" Elijah had heard similar theories from other doctors, all eager to explain away his experiences as mere delusion. But Dr. Pierce seemed genuinely interested, not dismissive. "It's real," he said simply. "I know you don't believe me. No one does. But it's real." "I believe that you believe it's real," she replied carefully. "And for now, that's enough for us to work with." Over the following weeks, Dr. Pierce provided Elijah with drawing materials, a concession she had to fight for with the hospital administration, who feared enabling his delusion. Elijah began to record his visions again, filling page after page with images of death, both within the hospital and beyond its walls. Dr. Pierce did not recoil from the drawings as others had. Instead, she studied them with the detached interest of a scientist examining specimens under a microscope. She noted the precision, the detail, the emotional distance evident in each image. "These are remarkable," she told Elijah one day as they sat together in the small consulting room where their sessions were held. "You have a genuine talent, regardless of what inspires these drawings." Elijah shrugged. "It's not me. Not really. My hand moves, but I'm just the instrument. The Whisper is the artist." Dr. Pierce leaned forward, her expression earnest. "Elijah, I have a proposal for you, an experiment of sorts." The boy looked up, curiosity momentarily overriding his perpetual exhaustion. "What kind of experiment?" "The next time the Whisper comes, I want you to write down exactly what it says, word for word. Can you do that for me?" Elijah hesitated. "It won't like that. It's private between us." "Has it told you not to share its messages?" Dr. Pierce pressed. "No, but..." Elijah trailed off, realizing he had no real argument. "I can try." That night, as Elijah lay on his narrow bed staring at the ceiling, the Whisper came again. "The old man on the first floor," it said. "Heart fails at midnight. He clutches his chest and falls beside his bed, unseen until morning." Elijah reached for the paper and pencil Dr. Pierce had allowed him to keep. He wrote down the Whisper's words exactly as he had heard them, his hand shaking slightly at this small act of rebellion. The Whisper paused, as if considering this new development. "The physician," it continued after a moment, "she seeks to understand. She will not, cannot, Her mind is too small, too bound by the physical world. Elijah wrote this down as well, a chill running through him at the whisper's awareness of Dr. Pierce and her intentions. Yet she too will join the endless sleep, the whisper added almost as an afterthought. Not soon, but sooner than she believes. Consumption hides within her lungs, growing, waiting. 2 years hence. She coughs blood onto white linen and knows her time draws near. Elijah's pencil hesitated above the paper. Should he record this? This prediction of Dr. Pierce's death, still far in the future but certain, according to the whisper that had never yet been wrong? Write it, the whisper commanded. All of it. Let her see what awaits. Let her know the futility of her quest for understanding. So Elijah wrote, tears blurring his vision as he recorded the fate of the one person who had shown him kindness in this place of despair. When he was finished, he folded the paper and placed it beneath his pillow to be given to Dr. Pierce at their next session. But there would be no next session. In the morning, when the orderly brought Elijah's breakfast, he also brought news. The old man on the first floor, Mr. Jenkins, a retired schoolteacher suffering from senile dementia, had died in the night of a heart attack, the doctors presumed. His body had been found beside his bed, one hand clutched to his chest, exactly as the whisper had described. And Dr. Eleanor Pierce, the young physician who had dared to take an interest in Elijah Kessler's case, had been summarily dismissed from the hospital staff. Her unorthodox methods and her willingness to indulge the fantasies of a disturbed child had finally exhausted the patience of the hospital administration. Elijah never saw her again. His drawing materials were once more taken away, and he was returned to isolation with only the whisper for company. The years passed. Elijah grew from a boy to a young man within the confines of the asylum, his world limited to a series of locked rooms and supervised walks in the hospital garden. The whisper remained his constant companion, announcing deaths near and far with the same casual cruelty it had always possessed. Without paper, Elijah found other ways to record the deaths. He scratched images into the plaster walls of his room with a nail pried loose from his bed frame. When the walls were repainted, covering his work, he began using his own skin as a canvas, creating temporary records with the point of the nail until the wounds healed and the images faded. By the time Elijah reached his 18th birthday in 1858, he had developed a reputation throughout the hospital as a harbinger of doom. Staff members requested transfers rather than be assigned to his care. Other patients made signs to ward off evil when he passed during his rare ventures outside his room. It was in the summer of that year, as Elijah sat beside the open window of his room listening to the whisper describe the drowning of a child in a town he had never visited, that the idea first came to him. Not an escape. He had long since abandoned such thoughts, but a different kind of freedom. The whisper sensed his changing thoughts. You consider joining the endless sleep yourself, it observed, neither approving nor condemning. Would you follow me there? Elijah asked, speaking aloud though he knew no human ear would hear or understand. Beyond death, would I still hear you in the grave? I am everywhere that life ends, the whisper replied, including the place where yours will cease. But the choice is yours, child. It has always been yours. Elijah considered this. Had it been his choice to hear the whisper, to see death's design, to record its handiwork in unforgiving detail? He didn't think so. But perhaps this, at least, could be his decision, his final act of autonomy in a life that had been controlled by forces beyond his understanding since that September night 6 years ago. That night, Elijah began making preparations. He pried more nails loose from his bed frame, straightening them and testing their sharpness against his palm. He saved portions of his medication, bitter pills that the orderlies forced between his lips, but that Elijah had learned to hold in his cheek and remove later. The whisper watched these preparations with interest but offered neither encouragement nor discouragement. It simply observed as it always had. On the night of August 14, 1858, Elijah Kesler swallowed the pills he had accumulated over weeks, then used the sharpened nails to open the veins in his wrists. He lay back on his narrow bed, feeling a strange peace as his life flowed out of him in warm red rivulets. "Will it hurt?" he asked the whisper, his voice already growing weak. All endings hold some pain, it replied, but yours will be brief. The endless sleep comes swiftly now. As darkness began to encroach on the edges of his vision, Elijah felt the familiar compulsion one last time. With blood-stained fingers, he began to draw on the wall beside his bed, creating his final recording, his own death, captured with the same precision and emotional distance as all the others. The image was nearly complete when Elijah's hand fell limp at his side. His eyes, still open, stared unseeing at the ceiling as the last breath left his body. The whisper fell silent, its purpose fulfilled, its scribe released from his terrible duty. Elijah Kessler was buried in an unmarked grave on the grounds of the Massachusetts State Hospital for the Mentally Ill. His passing was noted only in the administrative records of the institution that had been his prison for 6 years. But his legacy lived on in the drawings, dozens of them, scratched into the walls of his room and discovered after his death. The hospital staff painted over them immediately, horrified by their detail and accuracy. But rumors spread. Stories were told in hushed voices about the boy who could hear death's whisper, who recorded its work with uncanny precision. And somewhere in Ravenwood, hidden beneath the floorboards of the house on Willow Street where Dr. Abraham Kessler had once lived with his doomed son, a collection of drawings remained, waiting until the autumn of 1853, when the house's new owner, undertaking renovations, discovered them and summoned the constable. The leather-bound journal containing those early drawings was said to have been burned by order of the town council, a final attempt to erase the memory of Elijah Kessler and his dreadful gift. But some say it survived, passed from hand to hand over the decades, bringing misfortune to each who possessed it. And on quiet nights, in certain places where the veil between worlds grows thin, they say you can still hear it, a whisper, neither male nor female, young nor old, speaking of death and the endless sleep that awaits us all. A reminder that some gifts are curses in disguise, and some curses, once bestowed, can never truly be escaped. For once death has chosen its witness, its voice can never be unheard. And Elijah Kessler, the boy who heard death whisper, who drew every corpse before it happened, learned this truth in the most tragic way possible, by becoming the final subject of his own macabre art, the last victim of his unwanted gift. In the years that followed, the story of Elijah Kessler faded from memory, becoming little more than a local legend, a tale told to frighten children on dark winter nights. But the whisper continued, seeking another with the sight, another to serve as its scribe in the land of the living. And perhaps somewhere it found one. Perhaps even now, a child sits alone in the dark, hearing for the first time that cold, knowing voice, drawing with unnatural precision the moment when another soul joins the endless sleep. Listen carefully in the silence of night. You might hear it too, death's whisper, announcing its next appointment. And if you do, pray it isn't your name that falls from its formless lips. Pray you aren't the subject of the next drawing. For Elijah Kessler's gift did not die with him. It merely waits, patient as the grave, for another to inherit its terrible burden, another to hear death whisper, another to draw what must never be seen. And so our tale ends where it began, with a leather-bound journal, a collection of drawings, and the haunting legacy of a boy who heard more than any human was meant to hear. A boy who saw what no eyes should witness. A boy who, in trying to warn others of their fate, sealed his own. Elijah Kessler. Remember his name. And should you ever find yourself drawn to sketch something you haven't yet seen, something terrible and final, stop. Put down your pencil. Walk away. For once you begin to draw death's design, you become part of it. A witness, a recorder, a scribe of the ending that awaits us all. And the whisper, it never truly stops. It merely waits for someone to listen.